Welcome, welcome, welcome to my new series, Global Groove, where we talk about Blacks thriving abroad. My name is Cha Jones. I am your host, and I am super excited today because I have my very first, or actually, this is going to be my second guest, Christopher Campbell, who is currently living in Portugal. Christopher is an American lawyer, entrepreneur, and global citizen from the state of South Carolina. And after several years in China, Chris now works in Florence, Italy, and spends much of his time in Lisbon, Portugal, with his partner. Chris is the founder of Bespoke Portugal, a company dedicated to developing and curating experiences in Portugal, from designing tailor-made tours to assisting clients with their relocation efforts, including investments in buying homes. And I am super excited because Global Groove is new, and it's something I wanted to do to showcase that there are Black people living abroad who are thriving, and I wanted to showcase them in some of the most populated areas for Black expats. So without any further ado, please help me welcome Mr. Christopher Campbell. Hello, Christopher. How are you?
Hey, Shaw, good to be here. And you can go by Christopher, whatever works best for you.
Okay, I'll do a little bit more informal, Chris. I just did your intro and bio, but tell us a little bit more about who you are and what actually got you to Portugal.
Right. So, like you said in my bio, I'm a lawyer by day, Portugal enthusiast and expert by night. And that's how I spend a lot of my time. But before we can get to where I currently am, I guess it's important to know how a guy from Irmo/Columbia, South Carolina, finds himself on the other side of the ocean. And so that starts with the fact, as a kid growing up in South Carolina with an active imagination who really enjoyed meeting and getting to know people, hearing their stories. I think when you combine those two things, I often find myself enjoying meeting people that I would come across in my own neighborhood, across the state, across the country. And so at some point, I'm wondering, what it's like to meet and get to know people around the world. My aunt, who I'm very close with and still am very close with, she had a job working around the world. So she would go on these trips and she would send me postcards and bring little gifts back when she would come home. And that really sort of lit the fire or the inspiration for me to want to go and live abroad. So hearing her stories is kind of how it all started. And from there, my parents were from the New York and Philadelphia area, and they had come and moved down south and had left, some family back that way. And so one of the things I know that's hard for people sometimes is when you're considering a life abroad is, the idea that you've got family and friends back home. I'm lucky to have had supportive parents that were okay with the idea that their son might move across the sea with no plans to come back anytime soon.
Okay. So, what was your first experience even going abroad? I know that you worked in China. Was that your very first trip, or did you go anywhere else prior to?
Yeah, that's a great question. China was my first experience, really even going abroad. So I guess a little more context, and this goes into my professional background too. I studied at the Darla Moore School of Business at the University of South Carolina. Go Gamecocks! And they have this amazing international business school there, and they encouraged us to study, all these different languages, and especially at the time lesser spoken languages, at least in the U.S. context. And so that is what made me start studying Chinese, because China was having this huge, huge economic growth. And so I figured if I could do something for a career that would give me opportunities both in the United States and China, then hopefully that would make for an interesting career. And so that ended up being the case. And so I, along with some of my colleagues, we did this sort of class project where we sang Chinese songs while wearing traditional Chinese clothes. And we went, I guess, viral in China and got to go on Chinese national TV and the like. And so the Chinese government ended up giving our class, everyone in that class, a scholarship to go study in China for the summer. And so that's how I found myself, didn't have to pay for my ticket, didn't have to pay for the lodging over in China. And from that moment, I was hooked. I mean, having the opportunity to go, spend that time in China to see a different country, different culture, all of those types of things. And I'll tell you, it was, I think we'll get into this a little bit more in the conversation, but, you show up in Beijing with your little 4 semesters of Chinese language and you think you're going to be fluent and walking and running the place. Not so, as it turns out.
Right.
But it was a good time, and I was glad I did that. And that was kind of how it all started from the other countries that I've lived in since. And over the last 15 years, I've lived in a bunch of different places.
So what places have you lived other than China and Portugal?
Right. So I lived in Italy. I lived in Italy when I got this opportunity that brought me to Europe about almost 6 years ago now. And I did a brief stint in the United Kingdom during law school. I studied at the Gray's Inn Court. So the UK, Italy, Portugal, and China.
Okay. That's enough, because a lot of people don't even get outside their city or state. So you're doing big things. Now, you're currently in Portugal, but how did you get to Portugal?
So literally, because of my partner. She's Portuguese, and she and I had been doing long distance for a number of years. And so I eventually found an opportunity in Italy because we were both trying to find ways that we could be in the same place. And me being in Italy made us a 2-hour distance from each other. And so at that point, which was the end of 2018, start of 2019, I basically was in Portugal at that point, almost every other week. I'd been coming to the country since 2015. And so, with us being in that sort of close proximity, that at the start of the pandemic was when I guess I made my full-time adjustment to no longer being in Italy as much. I go there obviously for as much as necessary for work, but we got married during the pandemic. And so we set up a household during that period, a little pandemic romance. And the one other thing that I would mention is that, so when I went to study in China on that scholarship, my partner was actually literally doing a similar program at the same school at the same time.
Wow.
We did not. But we met 5 years later when I returned to China during that time frame. And so we were laughing and realizing that we were literally at some of the same events, knew some of the same people. And so that was kind of a happy coincidence. And I'm glad we met when we did, because we wouldn't have been a good match when I first went there.
Well, I'm glad you guys met and got married and now thriving in Portugal. So, what are some of the things that you like about Portugal? Because it is a hot, thriving place for a lot of African Americans who are leaving the States. They're going to Portugal. Portugal has a huge community in Lisbon, as not so big in Porto, but in Porto, there's a thriving community as well. I happen to love Porto. But tell me, what is it that you love about Portugal?
Thanks for the question, Sha. And I'll tell you this right now. Next time you're in Portugal, you got to say hello. We'll catch up and go sit on a rooftop and enjoy the views. I think for me, it's probably 3 main things and a couple of other things we'll talk about too. I'd say first, the quality of the lifestyle. I think a lot of people, especially Americans, kind of have this impression that if you move somewhere else, that your lifestyle quality will fall off. But I think, especially as a Black American, I think you can have a great quality of life in a number of countries, including in Western Europe and including in Portugal. Something that was really big for me, and as I'm thinking about us starting our family, is safety. I think just in general, the lack of guns, or there's a ubiquity of guns in the United States. And so having a lesser amount of those things makes the country just in general a little bit safer. As a Black American, especially a Black American that grew up in the South, the Deep South, those sort of racial tensions just don't exist. I'm not going to say that there's no racial incidences. Of course there are, but it's just a complete universe of difference. And that's something I try and sort of level set with Black Americans when they come to the country, is that you don't want to bring your perceptions from the States necessarily here to Portugal. And then this is kind of a more, I guess, low key thing, or it's just my experience and my perspective. But I think it's the resilience of the Portuguese people. And so, when you come to think about Portuguese history and culture, obviously they have their colonial past and the things that they did during that time. But you got to realize at the same time, to go from being an empire to now being basically a much smaller country with a smaller economy. Many people don't realize that after the end of World War I, Portugal had a dictator until the 1970s. And so they were sort of closed off from the rest of the world. And as a result of that, in terms of I think racial harmony, in terms of sort of similarly of culture, trying to sort of live together in those conditions, trying to figure out a way under the boot of an oppressor. I think you see some of those elements that are still around today. So Portuguese people, by and large, are very family and very society driven, that they are very strong and resilient people. And I think that comes across in the pride that they have in their culture, but also the welcoming spirit that they have to newcomers and people that come to the country.
Yeah, I loved Portugal. When I got there, it was easy. It was easy to get around. I remember when my son went to play at the playground, it was just easy. Like, he didn't speak the language, they didn't speak his language, but the integration was seamless, and the food was amazing. The weather was great. It was July and it was probably like 70 degrees. And I was like, yes, because I had breezes. So what was some of the things that you did not expect that you ended up getting from the quality of life or just being in Portugal that you absolutely think that people really should know about?
Yeah, so I think this is true of a lot of places where people go travel. But I think a lot of times what happens is people sort of try and recreate the exact same life that they have in one place in another place. And I think they do themselves a disservice. Um, the place that you're moving to has its own unique character and element, and there are all these cool things that make that place special. And so if you try and stay in your own little bubble in your own little area of expats, I think you miss out on a lot of those things. And so when we talk about the things that I really enjoy about traveling in general, but especially in Portugal, I think it's getting out and trying to live those local experiences. The cultural festivals that happen really all around the year, but especially from May through August, there's a different festival going on almost everywhere in the country. And you get to try the local food, the sardines, the bacalhau, the desserts in Christmas like serradora, faturas. I mean, all those types of things. I mean, those are the kind of things that you're sitting there and you get to really experience the essence of the people. I mean, the kind of thing that people know when it comes to Portuguese people, they're serious about their football, football in the European sense. And so the Euro Cup that happened, this was my first Euro Cup where I was actually in the country most of the time. And, that was a citywide event in Lisbon. I mean, they had the 3 or 4 different stations set up and you would have thousands of people out there and food trucks. And I mean, you could kind of feel the pulse, the heartbeat of the entire country with every goal, with every free kick. I mean, that's something that whether you care about sports or not, I think it's one of those things that is just sort of unique. And you get to see that in these sort of little rare sort of cultural moments. I think another one would be, because my partner is Portuguese and has a lot of family in the sort of more rural parts, we often will go out to sort of the sticks. So that's, I'm from South Carolina. I'm used to being out in the countryside, but this is a different kind of country. You get into town and there are people riding by on donkeys and when we go out there, I mean, yeah, we get up early, 5 o'clock in the morning, got to go out there and grab the stuff in the fields. And, you go inside when it starts getting hot. I mean, I think that slower pace of life, that simpler style of living is something that I think you can lose perspective of if you're used to living in a more industrialized, more urban environment. And I think that is every Portuguese person, even if they live in the city, has elements that ties to that. I think the final point that I would mention is, and I think this is true across most of Western Europe, is that bureaucracy. That bureaucracy is something real. And I think that, you just kind of have to adjust your expectations. Me coming from China, having lived in China, they have over 1 billion people that live there. So you're kind of a little bit more used to after things taking a little while. But if you're coming from the US, where maybe the government can move a little bit slower, a little faster at least, that can just kind of be a bit jarring. But I think, again, if your mindset is things just take the time they take and you're moving at a little bit of a slower pace, maybe that's okay.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Now, I do want to mention the sardines because I had never had sardines before because I always thought of little bitty tiny sardines in the can. I was like, oh, who is eating that? That's like eating beanies and weenies, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I was just like so not interested. And so when I went to Porto, like the sardines are like this big. And
Yep.
so I had some and I was like, oh, I've been living wrong my entire life. What's going on? But
That's
I
exactly right.
definitely cannot compare to what I see in the little cans that you like scraping and trying to eat out of that little can. I just totally
No.
disgusting. So yeah, the food is so amazing in Portugal. Now I know that you mentioned like getting out of what you were doing at home and experiencing the culture and being amongst the actual people of that country. Um, but Portugal does have a thrive, especially in Lisbon, has a thriving Black community, and I think for a lot of people, especially those who are moving from America and maybe this is their first country, it's important to have community and people who look like you that can kind of like just give you a safe sense of feeling like you're, amongst people that can show love, right? So how do you engage if you do in the Black community that's there in Portugal?
Yeah, that's something that actually surprises a lot of people when I tell them that there is a solid and growing Black American community here in Portugal. I think the proximity, where it is in Europe compared to the United States, makes it really attractive because it's a 6 to 7 hour flight to get from there to New York or DC, to Lisbon. I mean, and I think I engaged mostly, or it's kind of been by happenstance, in that during the pandemic, people were really curious. Everyone was sitting inside and they were having all these questions about stuff. And so, as somebody that was on the ground here and had been for a while at that point, and someone who speaks the language, I was trying to help people out in terms of trying to figure out, hey, here's how you file your visa. Here's some interesting places to go. Do's and don'ts when you come. All of those types of things were the conversations I was having with people. Myself and some other, this group in particular with Black men had gotten together about people that were interested in coming. We were having regular phone calls or video calls throughout that period, probably, once a month at some point, and then a quarter. And then, we still, for those that have moved here, we meet up on a pretty regular basis, at least a couple times a month, I would say.
Okay, y'all got the bros.
Hey, that's it. That's exactly
Like
it.
you got your own. Wait, hold up.
Yeah.
Now you're gonna have women coming to Portugal just because y'all got breasts. No, I'm kidding.
But I mean, yeah, there's a community. There absolutely is, and I say that Black men community is one part of the larger Black Americans community that's here, and adjacent to that, you have Black people that have shown up from other parts of the world, whether that be the UK, Australia, Germany, South Africa. That's not uncommon, and all of that increasingly blends and mixes with the Black Portuguese community. And so whether that be like from native Portugal or to the colonies, that's Lusitania, which is Cabo Verde, Mozambique, Angola, Azores, all of those types of places where you have tons of Black people. And especially in Lisbon, you'll find those communities. And so, it's not uncommon for us to go down to those neighborhoods, hang out with those people, because at the end of the day, although we might have a different background, there are a lot of similarities and a lot of perspective and shared culture.
Absolutely, I love it. I'm so proud of y'all for now. I tell people because this is the funny part. So I'm in Malaysia,
Mhm.
and before before I came to Malaysia, I had gone to Portugal. I went to Porto, and I loved it. Right? I was like, okay, I could live here. But I was moving from Mexico, and I was like, it's so far. And I ended up in Malaysia. So that's the ironic part of that journey of trying to find out where I'm. But I'm coming to Portugal. Like that's I
Come
think
on.
that's like my forever home. It feels like Portugal. I just ain't got there yet. So, I had to do a couple more stops before I come. But I, I, I'm, I loved it. I love the weather. I love the food. There's like nothing I didn't like. Only thing I did not like was the zoo price.
The
I went
zoo?
to, I went to the zoo and it cost me
Yeah.
$45. Like what? Why? And it wasn't huge or nothing. It was just like a couple blocks long. I was like, I paid $45 for this, but I
Yeah. That
digress.
National Zoo, I think that's probably the biggest one in the country, I would bet. The one in Lisbon?
No, it's the one in Porto.
Oh, you should have gone to one in Lisbon. See?
I
See?
didn't go to Lisbon. I was like, okay, I'm feeling Porto. I might live here.
Porto's
Um,
nice. Porto's nice.
I love it. But tell us a little bit more. Like, so for African Americans or Black Americans that are living in America right now, and now they're, because of the political climate, are seeking solace in other places, what advice do you have for them?
So I think it's very important to be clear in your mind, and this is advice we'll talk about probably a little more about what it is you're seeking in that life. Um, sure, we can acknowledge that the things are less than ideal in the United States. We'll call it that way. But it's not as if moving somewhere is going to magically fix all the other things in your life either. You're still going to have to deal with those problems, and you know you need to understand that every place you move to is probably going to have some things that you don't love either. So if the idea is I'm gonna move to some place and it's going to be perfect, it's going to be utopia, ain't going to be no problems. Nah, there's no place like that exists. But if you're still in the States, I think there's probably two mindsets. It's a mindset of am I staying or am I going? And if I'm going, I need to be clear about why am I going, what I'm trying to do, what I need out of that place, and make sure that the place you're looking to has those attributes or that you can deal with the good and the bad. I think if you're a Black American and you're still in the United States, I think you have to, especially now at the time of recording, which is late 2024, you got to understand that things might continue to not be great for Black people there. And so then what you can do if you're going to stay is, identify people in your life that you know and trust, whether those are Black people or other ethnicities. Y'all need to organize, whether you need to pool your resources, set some common agendas and common goals, and take care of those things first. Make sure y'all are good economically. Make sure you're stable in that way, because if you're stable there, then you have the time to start thinking about societal engagement, activism, those kind of things. So that even if it's a group of like 10 people, that can be a huge impact if you guys are all coordinated and dedicated to even a small level movement, school board stuff, taxes, how things are working in your community. The first step is actually knowing your neighbors, knowing people that you can trust and lean on, and y'all can lean on each other, build up each other. And that's kind of how movements start from the ground up.
Absolutely. I like that, because I think a lot of people are being emotional right now. They want to leave based off of just, president
Recent
elect.
events.
Right. And then they're moving based off of emotion, like I'm a jump ship. And I
Yeah.
think you really have to think about your why. And I did a whole video about the why, like, why are you moving? Why are you moving now? And if, like you said, if you're stable and you can make, a good stability where you currently are, you can possibly do that somewhere else. And I just feel like at this particular point, um, you know, a lot a lot of the people who want to jump ship have never even been abroad. So
Mhm.
it just kind of, you gotta take baby steps, and everything's not for everybody. And oftentimes, the thing I tell people this all the time, that you can't run from you. And
Mhm.
so a lot of times people are trying to run from the problem, and you take the problem with you, or you cultivate that same problem somewhere else. And so you have to really be clear about what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it. And then that kind of sets the precedence for everything else. And so it's quite interesting, which kind of brings me to my next question, about challenges. What challenges did you face or did you see other people face when they first move abroad, especially to Portugal?
Yeah, I think the biggest two barriers that immediately one will get hit with, especially if you don't have any background in Portugal, is a little bit of the language barrier, but again that bureaucracy. And I'll take each one in kind. Fortunately, if you move to a place like Lisbon, Porto, really even Coimbra, Évora, Braga, Viseu, any of those kind of places, most of the people you're going to run into speak English, so you're probably fine in that way. If you go to anywhere more remote than that, your chances of finding someone that speaks English are probably lower. Um, and so I think you need to, anytime you're going to move somewhere, I mean, it's probably a good idea to at least learn some of the language, some of the survival phrases, hello, goodbye, please, thank you, bathroom, food, any of those kind of things. I think that's a good thing to do. And Portuguese, especially Portuguese in Europe, has a little bit of a difference than what you would hear in a Brazilian Portuguese. It's
Right.
sometimes a bit harder to understand for a non-native speaker. And so I would say, yeah, Duolingo and Rise, Memorize, all those apps, they're great starters to learn some vocabulary. But the best thing that you can do is sign up for some classes, even if it's once a week, a couple times a month, something like that, just to get started with your ear getting pinged for the language. And ultimately, if you want to do a long term, if you're planning to live in Portugal, you need to learn the language for your bureaucratic stuff anyway. And speaking of bureaucracy, yes, things just take a while. They do. If when it comes to medical care, if you have private insurance, that can speed things up a pretty decent amount. But if you're waiting for the government program, that can sometimes take months to get seen. So you need to be prepared for that mentally. I think your visa, that's going to take the time that it takes, especially as popular as the country is becoming. It can take from end to end probably 6 to 8 months to get all the paperwork and stuff done and get approved. So I think people just need to be realistic and understand that it's not something that's going to happen in a couple of months. It's going to take some time. It should take some planning. And you want to talk to a lot of people, a lot of experts, get opinions, second opinions. Even when people talk to us, we don't take any offense if someone wants to check what we've told them with other people that are in the field, because things are sort of in a dynamic state right now with all the people that are coming.
Now, I know when I first looked into moving to Portugal, you all had a specific visa, and then over the last 2 years, that has changed. You guys currently have a digital nomad visa or something similar to that?
There's a digital nomad visa. That's a really popular one. It's more short term, but it will get you here for, I think it's a little more than a year or something like that. There is the D7, which is the passive investment visa. So if you have, some sort of assets outside of the country that generate a certain amount of income, I think it's €1,000 per month. That also works. Basically, the reasoning behind that is the government doesn't want you to come and then not be able to afford to take care of yourself. And then the minimum wage in Portugal is around €1,000. So that's why that's that threshold. There are a couple of other visas, but most notably, what made Portugal really attractive pre and then slightly during the pandemic was the golden visa, where you could invest a certain amount and or buy a piece of property valued at a certain amount, and that would get you. And you didn't have to be in the country while your visa was while you were going through that process. Whereas the other visas, you have to be in the country a certain amount of time. The golden visa has changed. So, in Lisbon and Porto, you can't do that anymore, but there are still versions of it around. For any of these schemes, I know there's some people that are really against hiring lawyers to do this kind of stuff. As a lawyer, maybe I'm biased, I don't know, but I know that anytime I'm moving somewhere, I really want to make sure that I'm in compliance with the law and doing everything as well as I can. So yeah, you can do some of these visa filing stuff yourself, but for me, call a lawyer. Even if you call us, I mean, we can tell you the name of a lawyer. You don't have to even necessarily pay us to do that. But I just don't like people to get in the wrong space or in the wrong way because they've tried to do it themselves and now they're caught up.
Absolutely. I think that's extremely important. And a lot of people try to move abroad and do the whole one suitcase move and, not really ask questions and they really don't have a whole strategy. But I think and I'm not just saying this because I'm a relocation specialist. I've been doing this for 15 years, but it is imperative because some of the things that you get yourself caught up in not knowing just can be, it's a waste of time because it could have been prevented. I know a lot of us don't like to pay people to be in a business, to do things right, but especially when you're living in a different country that you know nothing about. I know when I lived in Mexico, people were just coming because they felt like it was across the street, and the shenanigans. It was like,
Yeah.
yo, did you really think that was? But they didn't know no better, and you don't know what you don't know, and that's why it's imperative to ask questions and ask questions to the right people who actually have experience doing something. Which brings me to the next question, which is really about your challenges that you may have encountered while living in Portugal. Was there anything that kind of made you be like, why am I here? And I know that your situation is a little bit different because you actually have a partner, um, they're Portuguese. And then on top of that, like beyond challenges, like how long did it take you to learn Portuguese?
I would say mostly at the time of the pandemic. Why? Because I was basically in Portugal for 2 years without any ability to leave or go anywhere. And so we would go to like in-laws events, baptisms, cookouts, all that kind of stuff. And I'm the only English speaker. Everyone else speaks Portuguese. Or when we would go out to the farm, like I was telling you about, in that case, I might be the only native English speaker for 50 miles. So for me, it's in a matter of self-preservation and just like wanting to not sit in silence for weeks at a time. And at some point, my partner has things to do during the day. She can't be with me. We need to go to the supermarket all the time, or if I've got appointments, you need to be an adult and figure that out. So to answer your question, the immersion really accelerated that. And, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm completely fluent right now. I can read and speak and do those things okay. I want to get to the point where I can do like legal work someday in Portuguese, but what do? I take classes to study and practice on top of hanging out with my friends, down the street or at the gym or, what have you, because, there's one thing is to be able to speak sort of colloquially, but being able to actually do it at a high professional level, that takes some time.
All right. Did that cause any other challenges prior to, the pandemic?
Not so much, again, because I think a lot of my time, especially in that era, was mostly in Lisbon and Porto and Coimbra, and mostly there people speak English, and so you don't necessarily need to speak the language. But yeah, I mean, if you're trying to go somewhere, like trying to even go to a concert or something, you don't speak the language, and there are these signs that say very obvious things, and you don't know because you don't read the language or understand. Yeah, that can be a problem. But I think language specifically was not necessarily the biggest issue. I think, one thing that people don't think about a lot is when you move countries is like setting up all of your stuff for while you're gone. So bank accounts, phone numbers, mail, even like two-factor authentication, getting those things to work while you're abroad. Those things can be tricky. I mean, even, one thing that's kind of hard, very, very specific situation, but as a lawyer, I sometimes need to look at, the South Carolina court system. And they changed their IT policy that even if you have a VPN, you can't access the system. And so if I need to look up something in the South Carolina court system, I can't do that right now at the time of recording. So you have to find workarounds for those types of things, get help from people back home. But those are just things come up and you don't realize they're a problem until they're a problem.
I ran into that, especially like even apps, like because I set up certain things in Google prior to leaving the U.S. that you can't change those things. You can only change them once a year if you do change them, but like you can't change apps from one country to the next country without being in the original country. And so I ran into different things like that. So yeah, that's something that you really, it's not at the top of your mind when you're doing it, or when you're like, oh, let me get ready to go, and then you start moving, and then you like, oh, I can't do that. So that can be very interesting. So I know that you also help people with property. Let's talk about property for those who are interested in coming to Portugal and they are interested in buying. What advice would you give them?
So I think this is another situation where if you have a background in real estate, maybe you're a little bit more capable of dealing with this. But I think if you're new or it's not your main thing, the market is just really volatile right now. The prices, especially in Lisbon and Porto, are a little bit inflated, I think. Um, excuse me. And so to find deals, you have to really look through a lot of different listings. It's not the kind of situation where you can sort of take a quick afternoon, find some places, and then go buy something. I think you need to look where the locals live because the prices are probably a bit more adjusted there. Consider whether you really need to be in the city center or not. Is it okay to maybe be a 15-minute train ride or a short bus ride away? Because I think if you are okay with those things, then that will open up a lot more options to you. For example, the difference between a property in downtown Lisbon versus the suburbs, or even again that 15-20 minute train ride can be several $100,000 at least. So if we're talking about a 3 bedroom in downtown Lisbon or close to the city center in Lisbon, you're talking 700,000-800,000 euros right now. If you're willing to go a little bit further away, maybe you can cut that down to 5 or 6. And so that's the reality of what we're talking about right now. So advice, if you are not an expert in real estate and it's not your thing, hire somebody to help you come through it. Relocation experts, I tend to trust maybe a bit more than just going straight to the real estate agent, because at least the relocation experts will have some ability or some perspective outside the market, and will have had some other clients or customers that they've helped in doing that. But you want to have someone to help you do those types of things. Then I think you come here and visit and make sure you actually like living here before you put money down on a house, because I've seen people do that sight unseen, and then they're here for 6 months and they realize, oh, I actually don't want to be here.
I would give that advice if you are thinking about moving to Portugal. I would go there and see if this is really where I want to be, because there again, there's so many things that you don't know, and you think watching somebody's Instagram page, YouTube page, and they're giving you the highlights of what's going on. They're not giving you every day I have to deal with XYZ, the challenges. They're giving you the pretty, the glam. And it's important for you to go and find out what's for you, because that's their life. That's not your life. And it's not, comparing apples to orange, or you're not comparing apples to apples. You're comparing apples to oranges based off of, you don't know what their budget is. You don't know how they really live in beyond the cameras. You don't know some of the things that they're dealing with. Can you deal with the fact that you may not be in a place where they speak English consistently? You're using a translator, because that can be very tiring. So there's so many things that go into making the decision to live abroad. So Chris, we have these people who want to live abroad. They want to come to Portugal. They saw all the glam. They see all the community. What's next? Like, what do you think they need to invest in beyond like coming to do a site tour and really looking at Portugal? Give us how much time, if I am going to do a site tour, how much time should they really invest to come into Portugal, to thinking about, I really want to actually be an expat and make the move. Give us some details about what you think would actually be a decent, I guess, cost of living in Portugal, specifically Lisbon, and the good old advice that you just would have for any expat that's coming there, especially if they need to hire you.
Sure thing. So let me take those things. I'm being, very lawyerly and taking notes, so I make sure to hit all of them.
I hit you with 3-4 of them, so.
Yeah. So in terms of time needed, I think basically you want to set yourself up with 2 time frames. The first one is for that scouting trip, just to kind of survey the country very briefly, make sure it's something that you like. I think 2 weeks should be enough to do that. at least 10 days or so in order to come land somewhere, check out a couple of places, and not feel like you're doing it on a rushed basis. Now, assuming you have a good time and you enjoy, and you're like, I would like to proceed on that basis, you would then maybe want to come back, a couple of months later, and you want to spend, I think, at least a month, 6 weeks even, to really be in the area or the neighborhood where you think you like to be. And while you're there doing that trip, that second trip, I think you can do things like open up a bank account, get a NIF. A NIF is your national ID number. You can talk to some relocation specialists while you're here, some accountants, lawyers, all of those types of things. Start the process so that will make your second trip more efficient. But I think for me, and what I tell our clients and coach our clients on, I would not begin setting stakes down until you've at least started planning that second trip. That's me. Now, of course, if someone wants to do a little bit more, proactively, hey, look, all power to you. We would love to help you and love to chat with you and talk you through those things. But that's kind of, I think, best practice. In terms of cost of living, so you may have heard me mention earlier in this chat, the average, that the Portuguese minimum wage is around 1,000 euros, which is about like $900 a month. So that's not very much by Western standards. Realistically, you're probably going to need to have a way of making money either on investments or a job outside of the country when you come, because Portuguese salaries are just not high and wages aren't high, especially for foreigners, and especially for foreigners that don't speak Portuguese. So I think if you're thinking about rent, you can expect to spend between $1,000 to $2,000 a month, depending on what kind of place you want and how you want to live. $2,000 to get you a very nice place, even for a 2-bedroom, maybe a 3-bedroom in a certain neighborhood. But between $1,000, $2,000 a month on rent, utilities, if you're talking about all in what you need to survive, I would think $2,500 should be enough. 3,000, if you want to be super comfortable. But again, remember that people are managing to live on $900 a month. So you can certainly make that happen. It might require, if you like to eat out more frequently, you might have to scale that back if you're trying to go on a shoestring budget. But there are certainly people that get it done for $2,500 or less. But, obviously, as you go up above that number, the more luxury and the more that you can afford to do other stuff while you're here. This is a sort of a silly one, but one that kind of does always strike me because it hasn't gone up with inflation as much. But movie tickets here are still like $9. Movie tickets here are $9, and the snacks and stuff. They haven't gotten the memo that you should charge $10 for a bag of popcorn and a drink and everything. For each of those things, that will still cost you like $5. So I mean, that gives you sort of an idea.
That's an American thing.
Yeah.
Going to movies anywhere else is like $10 for you and the family. It's like, what?
Exactly.
They give you all that popcorn and everything, and you like, why am I paying $45 in America for this? For some popcorn and to watch a movie that is ridiculous that somebody has on bootleg already. So
that's right. But I mean, and if someone's short on time and they're trying to think of other things they can do to find out about the country, read. There are a bunch of books out there about it by now, a bunch of blogs. There are a bunch of people that are here that have their own followings on social media, YouTube, Instagram, all of those types of things. Our friends over at Our Rich Journeys, a really great one with Amon and Christina. They have a great series that they do. If you're on Facebook, Black in Portugal is a great group set up by a friend, Heather, and her admins over there. So there are some great resources out there for folks that are looking to get set up over here.
Thank you so much for that. So if you have any words of encouragement, I know we kind of talked about that a little bit early on, but anything that you just really want to be able to share about your experience or just moving to Portugal in general?
About moving to Portugal in general, I think it's a matter of again, I think it's thinking about why you're doing this and focusing on, your own stability and peace. And as long as you keep that centered, whether it's Portugal or somewhere else, you and your life and your family will be secure. I think more generally, I know, again, not ideal times for our friends over in the United States, but I think you have to keep your eyes focused on, what's going on in politics or at the national level. That doesn't define you. That doesn't determine what you can do and what your life can be. And so I think you focus on taking care of you, your family. And if you're not happy with where you are, think about, okay, how can I change that? What can I do? and how can I take ownership of that?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you said that, because oftentimes we get so caught up in the grand scheme of things and thinking about the president, when everything that happens that impacts you in your daily life is on the local level. Who
Mm-hmm.
is your sheriff? Who is the mayor? Who is the governor? Those people actually impact your life way more than the president. There's some national policies, yes, that will impact your life. But for the most part, everything that's happening in your state and in your local government, you need to know who's on your city council. You need to know who is impacting the school board. You need all the things that you said earlier. So getting involved and being an advocate for you and your family and your neighborhood, that is what's going to be important. And I think we just get so caught up in who's going to be running the country. And those policies don't necessarily touch your day-to-day life. So I
Absolutely.
think that's extremely important to mention. So that's just my little tidbit.
Absolutely. I think that's right.
So tell us, how can people reach you? Like if they're coming to Portugal, they want to work with you, how do they get in contact with you?
Sure. So the easiest way to do that is at our website, which is bespokeportugaltours.com. That's the easiest way. It has our website there. Our email and contact information is there. I'm also, when I'm doing lawyer stuff, you can find me on LinkedIn really easy. I specialize in international law, arbitration, contracts, and disputes. So if you look me up on LinkedIn, I'm easy to find there as well. Or if you're a social media person, you can find me on Facebook as Chris Campbell Portugal, or CMC the World, at CMC the World on Instagram. So I am easy enough to find. And well, I guess you're now hearing this, so any of the things that I've just said, you can listen to and use those to find me.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to finally meet you. It's a pleasure to actually have a conversation with you. We'll have to do this again at different time. Again, want to send my congratulations to the COVID wedding.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
finding love in Portugal. So I wish you many, many blessings and a happy and successful marriage, as well as business. I hope that it just keeps growing. So please reach out and let's do this again some other time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shah. I appreciate your time. Thank you for letting me talk to your audience, and we look forward to seeing you here in the country again sometime. Bem-vindo.
Absolutely. And thank you. So that's been another episode of Global Groove. Please check us out next week. We'll be doing another country where we are thriving abroad as African Americans. So it's been real. Once again, I'm Cha Jones, and you can catch me on Life's a Vacay at YouTube at Cha Jones. Peace. Thank you so much. That was fun.
It was a ton of fun.
Yes. I didn't know you was just getting married and doing big things and learning languages and all kinds of stuff. I'm like, I'm not living the life.
No, you're doing great. This is cool that you got this show, and you out here jet setting yourself, and I appreciate you reaching out. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yes. Oh, it did not stop.
Oh, the recording.